I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. What do we need to know about how functional medicine coaching in the hands of a gifted practitioner can be transformative for people with hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's autoimmunity? Today, we are so fortunate to be joined by Jasmine Parker, who is an expert in this arena, both due to her training and her personal story. Jasmine, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Rob.
I was struck as I was getting ready for today's session that you and our genesis story is similar, and that we've both come from conventional medical backgrounds, which I tend to have a bias that can be very helpful. I don't have the bias that it's a necessity to be helpful to others, but I think those of us that have been trained in conventional medicine, we are pretty clear-eyed about the need for medications when necessary, the need for procedures. And so I do think that adds a neat aspect to how we can support people. And maybe we can talk a little today about folks that think they don't need thyroid medication, for example, while they're trying to do other things to help their thyroid or not tax it unduly. But what I'm most excited about today is just that we have a Functional Medicine Coaching Academy certified health coach here in Homer, Alaska, and she changes so many people's lives. And something I'd definitely like to focus on is for our audience, who I thank for joining us. I'd really like them to get a sense of why to investigate that, because we're sort of in the early adoption phase around functional medicine coaching, and places like Harvard and other places are doing a lot of studies on behavior change, and a lot of how people change beneficially is not intuitive. And this has been illuminated in part by things by Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg and others. But let's start with just we're going to get into where does hypothyroidism come from? Um, how does it impact your personal journey? Why are you driven to provide this to others? But let's not bury the lead here. Why should somebody be interested in a coach to make a difference? Because so many functional medicine devotees are women. I think the ratio is 1 to 7. It's just it's shocking. Women have this terrible prevalence of hypothyroidism, autoimmune, or Hashimoto's. So there's a whole bunch of women listening to us who are going to be really interested in this.
Yeah, I think it's really important for a couple different reasons to have a functional medicine coach or practitioner on your healthcare team. For one, they look at everything with a completely different lens than what we're trained with in conventional medicine. The whole standpoint of functional medicine is essentially taking a whole body approach, remembering that our body functions as one system and not separate parts. Because in conventional medicine, as a lot of us know who've been on the, I like to call it the doctor to doctor roundabout, is we get sent to all these different people and still end up with no answers. And that's because we're treating everything as a separate part. Functional medicine takes a lens of taking everything into account from the time you were born up until your current age and saying, hey, let's put these puzzle pieces together and figure out how you got here and figure out why your body is kind of working against you right now. And so you look at it from a completely different lens. And then the coaching aspect of it too is we have a hard time with habits. So I think the book you mentioned is really good. There's a few habits books, but while we may think it's so easy just to make a change, the underlying fact is there has to be a motivational driver behind that, a really passionate why. Why do you want to change your health? We don't like sitting in a state of brain fog or fatigue or anxiety, but we're also dismissing ourselves and we're saying, oh, this doesn't matter. And we're not actively trying to change it either. And so where a health coach, especially in the functional medicine realm, comes into play, partnering with a provider is to really help you take all of the lifestyle changes we go through, the nutrition changes, the environmental changes, and really helps you work that, meeting you where you are into your life so that you can have sustained health and wellness as you move through that. So getting over the autoimmunity in this case, and then sustaining it, keeping yourself in remission, and having that longevity piece as well.
Mm, mm. Beautiful. Yeah, I can never get enough of this stuff. And because I live in a rural area, my audience has gotten sick of hearing me say this, but
Yeah,
Thursdays are when I get to be with my tribe, right?
I love it.
So, so I'll take a little risk here. The Field Notes audience is pretty familiar with autoimmunity, pretty familiar with hypothyroidism to some degree. And so another thing I try to do on the podcast is really make it a chance to look under the hood with an expert about things they wouldn't hear in other settings. So
Love
if you
that.
feel strongly we need to talk about the mechanisms of hypothyroidism or autoimmunity per se, make sure and do that. But let's take a little risk here and presume our audience has a pretty high level of sophistication. And maybe let's go to something which may be a more burning imperative for them, which is, would you give us an example of something people assume they can do? Let's just use willpower because
Mm,
it's early January. So let's just use this example. People say, well, I can do this on my own because I hear this all the time.
yeah.
And it's always embedded in self-criticism. They always say,
Mhm.
this is when I'm going to get it together. This is when I'm going to get the willpower. This is when I'm going to get the drive. And the folks in my area who benefit so much from one of your colleagues, Carol Comfort, same training, they are just blown away that what they do to get better isn't what they thought they would do. And it's definitely not willpower.
Mhm.
Would you be willing to share an example of that so people can kind of pick up the vibe of how the character of this is different and how it's both easier and harder? Like the accountability maybe is harder than they expect, but the steps are easier.
Yeah, it's really funny that you bring up willpower in January. I personally like to call it motivation by punishment. I think we're very critical of ourselves, and we set this expectation along with the rest of society that come January, it's a new month and I've got to have, everything together. But what we don't understand is the underlying subconscious of that is we're driving it by punishment. We're
Hmm.
not driving it by an underlying, like healthy reason, I would say. A lot of it is, I've got to get in shape. I've got to look this way. I've got to do that. And if we don't, there's a reason everyone falls off come February. It's because it's not sustainable. We are
Hmm.
just going along with what everyone else is doing, and we're doing it in a way in which we're punishing ourselves, in that we set that goal as an expectation unrealistically, not in a proper timeline, and it's motivated by judgment, or guilt and shame of ourselves or what other people are saying about us. So I don't like when we do that. And so why having a functional medicine coach is helpful in this realm is because we really dive into how we can set things not only the smart way. SMART is a acronym for SMART goals. But also we're doing it with purpose. We're doing it in mindfulness of where we're going, and not something that's going to be a short-term fix, a little band-aid approach, I like to call it. It's going to keep us on track and sustain that. Will you repeat your question again to me?
Well, you did answer it. The thing that might be helpful though is so give an example, right? The person uh, thankfully folks get disenchanted with running the willpower experiment and then they I think they get tired. They think there's got to be something better than this. And so then
Yes.
when they work with you, what's an example of that fresh feeling? Because this is what happens with Carol all the time. Person comes back and says, wow, this is working. They're
Yeah.
surprised because they've also gotten fatalistic that they're not going to get better.
Yeah.
And so maybe provide some anecdotes or examples from the work that you do of when the person comes back to you and they say, Jasmine, thank you so much. This is making such a huge difference for me, of how it's different than willpower. What would be an example of it?
I definitely agree with you that we overcomplicate everything, and we think it has to be more challenging than it actually is. But when you get under the hood with a functional medicine provider and coach, what you see is foundational work.
Mhm.
And we look at that and we're like, well, this is easy, but we kind of dismiss that easiness. We're like, oh, I have to get better sleep. I have to manage my stress. I have to eat healthy. Okay. They want it to almost be more complicated than it is, but it isn't.
Mhm.
And so when
Mhm.
I work with people, when we do the foundational work and when it comes to those habit changes, is not only do we go through the SMART goals of like setting with them, okay, you want to achieve this goal, right? This is something we're working on. For example, we'll take weight. Weight's really a huge thing. And they'll set a goal of, especially for January, like I want to lose 20 pounds. And they have their functional medicine provider have a plan for them, and it comes my way. And then what happens is we've got this goal set, lose 20 pounds in January. But when we dig further, we go through, is that realistic for you? Let's say you've never worked out before, or you don't even move regularly. That's an unrealistic goal. So you're setting yourself up for failure right away, which is not fair to you. And then it also discourages you at the end from doing it again. Well, this never works. Well, it never works because we don't set it up correctly either. So then we're looking at, do we even have the tools to make that a possibility? How are we going to do this? And then it's us walking through essentially how we can partner and set up with them every step of the way. How can I help you list the equipment or get the equipment you need? How can we figure out what is the actual goal for you when it comes to autoimmunity and specifically when people want to lose weight? Choosing something that's high intensity is not a great idea. And so it's having that awareness specifically with these women to partner with them and say, hey, in my experience, this isn't a great goal overall because this is the wrong exercise for you. So it's being able to take these pieces as well and then set them up for better success. And so when we, for instance, aerobics is better if anyone was wondering, especially when you're in a healing modality. Not that you can't ever do high intensity later, but when you're in at the beginning of your healing journey, when your body is under a lot of stress, aerobic exercises are better, like yoga, Pilates, weight training, or strength training, excuse me, walking, things like that. So it's also looking at that piece so that we can fundamentally set them up for success. And then it's also helping them understand, why is this important to you in the first place? Why do you want to lose weight? Is it driven by a negative mindset you have of you're ashamed of your body and it's actually punishment for you? Is it driven by other people's expectation of who you are and what you should look like? Because both of those, whether they come from everyone else or from our negative mindset, is going to result in failure. It's not coming from a place of love and nourishment for your body. And so when we walk through SMART goals and mindset, especially when it comes to habit changes, I'd like to get very intentional with them for that reason. It doesn't matter what the goal is at the end of the day. It can be weight, it can be anything else. When it comes to those foundational changes, it requires intention. That is what's going to sustain you when things get hard. Because trust me, when you're on a lifelong journey and having to keep autoimmunity in remission, things get hard, they get challenging. We're not going to be perfect every step of the way. And that's something that I like to drive home with them, especially mindset wise, because normally, like in January, when we fall off in February, we give up for the entire year after that. And it's really about understanding that these expectations of falling off or having cheat days or hiccups are going to be present no matter what, and it's okay. We just need to get back up and do better either the next time or the next day and not just throw it all away, basically.
Mm. Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah,
How many years have you had your own personal healing in place via functional medicine?
it will be going on 4 years now.
So what things would you like to share about that?
From my personal experience, it was like you said, we're both conventionally trained. Most people are. You really don't get far without being conventionally trained, but both conventionally trained. It wasn't until I had my own personal health experience in a crisis mode, I would say, after I had a concussion. So my journey, actually, I like to call it, that was my trigger. for various reasons. But I ended up having a concussion at home at the end of the first year of the COVID pandemic and got diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome. And what was supposed to be healed, your brain's healed after, a month or two for my doctor, things were not. They got significantly worse. The brain fog and fatigue definitely intensified. It would not budge. The migraines were getting worse. I ended up having my anxiety lead to daily panic attacks, sometimes panic attacks more than once a day. It was very debilitating. And for someone who's working during a pandemic at bedside in critical care, it's like, we can't be having panic attacks like this. So there was definitely even more panic from that and the stress of having to serve during such a difficult time. So you have all the stress on there, the migraines. I started developing food sensitivities and rashes that would just light my face up and spread down my neck into my shoulders. I ended up having a resting heartbeat of 150. Though the rhythm was fine, it was something that was new and wouldn't go away. And so what happened is we tried to essentially shove everything into the post-concussion syndrome box. Anything that we could, even if it was a stretch. And every other symptom that didn't fit that box, I was, of course, put on the roundabout of specialists to go see and fix those issues. And what ended up happening with me is I went from being in my younger 20s on, one medication and then being on 10 different medications, which were constantly changing because they weren't working. But that's because we weren't serving the actual cause of everything. But they weren't working. So we were constantly changing the medication, changing the dosage. And all of that ended up leaving me in the emergency room with the ER doctor telling me, you're on too many medications, you're over medicated. I was like, great, this is
Mm,
fun.
mm,
And then at that point, that was okay, I tried it the conventional way, the only way I knew, but like I tried it this way, but this way is not working. It's making everything worse. And I'm worse off now than when I started, and I'm further away from returning to service, basically. And that's when I decided I had to do something else. There had to be something else other than this. And it wasn't until I was speaking with a chiropractor friend of mine and kind of telling her this whole story and my frustration and the hopelessness I felt, that she shared with me her own husband's story of a sudden heart attack that he had, and how he went through the same conventional process. And they also thought, we have to find another way. There has to be something different. And they found a functional medicine provider. And so she sent me there, and I was like, okay. For me, I had that hopelessness of like, okay, send me to another person. I've seen a lot of people already. But then I also had, okay, this is something different and it's a new avenue to try. I don't know what it is, but I'm willing to try, because you get to a place where you feel so desperate just to feel better. And what was interesting is when I went to this functional medicine practitioner, I just couldn't help but chuckle to myself, because I'm like, what is this? They were so thorough. Within that first hour, I've never had so much attention in like a doctor office, like a clinic, so much attention on my case. And you could literally watch him as he sat silently. The wheels are turning. He's trying to put the puzzle pieces together. He's chiming in and asking me questions. And I started to get excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody cares. Somebody wants me to feel better. Somebody wants to help me. And it was just shocking just having that experience. If nothing else had come from it, I was just like amazed at the change in just the way that in a conventional clinic versus a functional medicine clinic, the way that the provider even practices and performs in that room with you was mind-blowing to me. But it was in that first visit that he was able to tell me what was going on. And he's like, Jasmine, your list of symptoms that you wanted me to figure out, it's all sounds thyroid related. And then when we did further testing, we found out it was autoimmune. But I was shocked. I'm like, how did I get from a concussion to a thyroid issue. I don't understand. And so that's when they really start to dive in that's like when the bubble bursted for me, where like it was like, there's more than just this under the surface to look at, Jasmine. Everything changed from that moment. I was a little kid learning everything again. I'm like, tell me more. How does this work? And once you get into that space as a patient, even as a provider or a coach now, you can't see it any other way. Like, it's amazing the work that gets done in a functional medicine, clinic and office and just with the providers. They're absolutely incredible. But it completely changed not only my life and finding a diagnosis for me to be able to work on and get to remission in, but it brought me more clarity on the neglect I had for my body and the way that I really needed to settle in and make changes for me. But it also changed the way that I practice. I practice more in a functional medicine setting now than I do a conventional one, because I think a lot of times, as you mentioned, in a conventional setting, there is a time and a place for medications and surgery and emergency care, 1000%. But the other 90% of the time, because we're not in a hospital all the time, the other 90% of the time when we're out living our lives, we have so much control of things in our own lives that affect our health that we can be working on.
Fantastic. Yeah, I kind of got the chills there a few times when you were talking about that. That's my single favorite clinical experience ever. I can never get enough of it. I'll always look back, you know, someday and just remember those moments that the person felt heard. And I think the energy in the room changes when they realize they're heard and that
Yes.
there are avenues. And one brief editorial comment there is that my first 6 years in medicine was conventional only. So I always thought of myself as an open-minded person, but I had 6 years to witness what does and doesn't work. And even in my first 6 years of practice, I always thought that the ultimate superpower in clinical medicine was listening deeply and attuning myself to the radio station of that person. And I had already found out that the outcomes were really mind-blowing just with deep listening, and that the person would come in and say they needed another uh, blood pressure drug, but deep listening would result in finding that their marriage was in shambles. Or the
Yes.
person would come in thinking they needed a psychotherapist and they had new onset, uh, something or other, just the attunement. And in fairness, that was part of the training at the University of Utah as one of the best internal medicine attending physicians I ever worked with on rounds in the hospital. He said it's all in the history. 80% of
Yeah.
what you have to do is in the history. And if you
Yes.
don't get that right, you can't do any meaningful work. You can't use the CT scanner or the labs to make any difference at all if you don't
Yes.
know how to really collect and recollect and reiteratively work
Yes.
with what's revealing in the narrative. So I don't think that can be overstated.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree for you. The biggest thing when it comes to like being in this functional medicine space, and my motto with my business is feel seen, feel heard, feel empowered. Those are things that even I as a um, patient and also somebody in the conventional space is something that's super, super important. And there's a lot of people that end up feeling not heard and not seen. And I think just as you said, the single best thing you can do is listen, because everyone, and that's something as I coach with too, I try not to fix things for my clients, because what I do know is that they hold all of the answers. They
Mm,
hold all the answers, and I'm just a guide walking along with them. They know
mm,
exactly what to do. They know exactly what's wrong. They trust their body. They hold the answers, and it's my job to help ask the correct questions, the open-ended questions, to get them to understand they have all this power, that they make the true change for their health. So I absolutely think that active listening is a huge, huge part of something that you can do for someone to make all the difference.
mm. So, Jasmine, people love to take away from a podcast interview action items,
Yeah.
and you have 5 things. Is that right?
Yeah.
That are things you
Yeah.
can share today that people could act upon or think about that are food for thought for next steps. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. So for me, the biggest thing that I want to convey as a Hashimoto's educator, as a patient, as a someone who's in remission, if I had to start all over again, because I know the biggest question I get asked all the time is, I've been diagnosed, where do I start? That's always the question. And so for me, if I had to start all over again, the 5 things that I would point people in the direction of is number one, understand the value of adding a functional medicine practitioner to your healthcare team. They truly look at things with a different lens. It is not, some pitch for providers. It is something that I truly feel in deep alignment with. It's something that changed everything for me, got me to where I wanted to go a lot quicker on my healing journey. The second thing would be when it comes to autoimmune diseases like Hashimoto's, please do not underestimate the power that stress has on your body, whether that's physical stress, emotional, or mental. So we're talking trauma, we're talking, our day-to-day jobs, whether that's running late or giving a presentation or just working at a hospital in critical care. Like, it's very stressful, and it causes over time, when we're stressed out so much, inflammation on the body, loads of inflammation. And so I know it's so easy for people to just dismiss stress, like, okay, I'm not going to go sit somewhere and breathe. I'll just keep pushing through, but please, please, please understand what that's doing to your body. And that also includes, if you're not hydrating well, if you're not nourishing your body well, you're also creating stress on your body for those reasons too. So just be mindful to how stress is really, really, truly impacting you. The third thing for Hashimoto's, this one's going to be controversial for sure. But during your healing journey, when you're starting off right away, is I have found very importantly, and it is a very high food that causes a lot of inflammation in the body, and it's gluten. This is controversial because people are like, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to be very cautious with this recommendation, and that is we don't want to ever create an environment where people have food fear or feel food restricted. But when it comes to gluten, understand that it is very inflammatory, and the protein itself can create some mimicry that makes things worse when it comes to autoimmune conditions. And so taking it out during the healing portion of your journey is really beneficial, because our main goal is to significantly drive down the inflammation. You can always trial in adding it back to your lifestyle after that. Was that 3? The fourth thing, I was
Yeah,
like,
this
what
is
number am
awesome.
I on?
You're on 3. Yeah, this is impressive.
Perfect.
Your tour de force.
Yeah, so my next one would be blood sugar regulation. Most people think you have to be a diabetic to pay attention to your blood sugar, but that is not the case. When we have imbalanced blood sugar, it actually can mimic the same symptoms that our thyroid gives us, like the brain fog and the fatigue, and really creates inflammation and disruption in our body. And so as somebody who is a chronic breakfast skipper, I would tell you to not do that. I've had to learn to eat breakfast again and really start with adding a lot of protein, and to make sure that I'm not, drinking too many fruit juices during the day, increasing that sugar in other ways, especially when we, want to grab heavy carbs at the beginning, like a bagel and cream cheese in the morning, which is not the best. Blood sugar regulation is so huge, and is something that I know me and all of my colleagues that deal with Hashimoto's is a staple in all of our protocols. So that would be the next thing. And then the last thing I would say is really know where to find the proper education resources and tools when it comes to Hashimoto's, because there is a gap in Hashimoto's care, especially in conventional medicine. The experience is that the treatment is the exact same as hypothyroidism, and it never addresses the autoimmunity part of Hashimoto's, nor the gut part. And the reason I bring up the gut part is because 75% of our immune system is in our gut. So we really need to take that whole body approach. And so arming yourself with the right education, resources, and tools is really going to help keep you on track, get you the healing that you want so you can get back to thriving in life.
Awesome. Now you've got a #1 best-selling Amazon book, Hidden Healing. When did you write that, and what was your drive to uh, to do that and create that resource for people?
Yeah, so hidden healing is interesting. It was a journey. It started off actually as a journaling session for me during my health crisis. There was a lot of emotion, a lot of loss of hope, the things that I would be told, the gaslighting, the dismissals. There was a lot, and journaling was honestly my only outlet for what was going on during the time. And so it really just started as a journaling prompt. And then this past year, anytime somebody would ask me my story, they're like, oh my God, you have such a powerful story. You should share it. And I was very nervous too, because all of our journeys are very personal and sometimes they're very painful, and we're not really open to sharing them. And so, with a lot of pushing, I decided to tell a part of my story so that people can also feel seen and heard, and that they're not alone, because a lot of the times when you can't see an illness, you feel very isolated, that you're going through it alone. And then the second piece that is very on my heart and the drive in what I do, as a coach now, as somebody who educates, as a registered nurse, is educating. And so I partnered it with a lot of the education of conventional medicine, but also functional medicine, because I think it's really important that people understand they go hand in hand. They fill each other, they make each other complete. They should never be separated. And I think people get that wrong. And so I wanted to bring it together to help people, make sure they don't feel alone, understand that there is a gap in care, but like what can fill that gap, which is functional medicine, and that they should be utilized together.
Mm. Well, I feel very inspired getting to talk to you. This is such great content. I'm so happy for the people who are going to benefit. Is there anything that you wanted to share today that we didn't get to?
There's always going to be a lot for sure. You'll just have to follow me on Instagram at Jasmine Parker Coaching.
Perfect. And that's what's your website? How would a person find you there?
Yeah, you can find me at jasmineparkercoaching.com, or you can find me solely on Instagram at Jasmine Parker Coaching. That's my main platform. And then my book, Hidden Healing: A Nurse's Path to Overcoming Hashimoto's and How You Can Too, is on Amazon.
Super. Thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for all the light you bring.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for the Seaworthy podcast. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. If you think we've earned it, please consider giving this podcast a like, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. Thanks.